These are conversations we have as part of the Blacks and Green Black Chicago Water Council. And we're here today to really dig in, and especially where our children are concerned, where our daycares are concerned. We're on a mission to make sure that those institutions in our community whose care for our babies and our youth is their charge, that they are in complete and full partnership with us, receiving the information, receiving the benefits, and really, again, is that word protection, protecting our people. I'm Naomi Davis, and I am the founder and the CEO of Blacks and Green, otherwise known as BIG. And we are a 501c3 community-based organization, but we're here as the authors of the 8 principles of green village building, what we consider to be a whole system solution for the whole system problem common to Black communities everywhere. We are looking to advance a new approach to Black community economic development. And so as we work to cultivate what we call the sustainable square mile here on Chicago's South Side in the West Woodlawn neighborhood, we're looking to reinvent that walk to work, walk to shop, walk to learn, walk to play village where African-American families own the businesses, own the land, and live the conservation lifestyle. So we teach neighbors to be their own emergency management systems. And we know that more than that case of meat, more than that case of water, the thing that saves us all with an efficiency and a power that we're looking for is to work as community. It's not a household issue. It's not a statewide issue. When the emergency hits, we are our own best emergency management solution as neighbors. And so we work to organize at the neighborhood level as well as the national policy level and those spaces in between. But we're here today because we are looking at how we're going to measure and manage success in having lead-free water in the Chicago environment. And we're blessed to have our team led by Nuri Medina here, and our partners that he will introduce you to. Welcome to the Green Living Room in the Obama Presidential District on the Bronzeville, USA. So welcome, and here's Nuri.
Good afternoon. I'm Nuri Medina, and I am the director of the Sustainable Square Mile in West Woodlawn for Blacks and Green. And I'm also the project director of the EPA's EJSG Lead-Free Water for All program. And I'm really pleased today to be able to introduce you to the partners and collaborators that we have in this very important program. And I'm very also pleased to introduce our very honored and respected guests, and particularly our guests from the Environmental Protection Agency. I want to emphasize that this is a new era, and we should see this as a new era in the ability to solve community-based problems and the ability to improve the life of our residents in these cities and in the country. And that is that government is here to serve the people. And I'm very thankful and excited that we do have government and government agencies now that are committed to that goal, and that we are finally getting some assistance from the government to solve these local problems. But I will also note that at the end of the day, and this is a very core of our concept of sustainable communities, at the end of the day, we must save ourselves. So we are very, very honored to have the support of this EPA program and our honored guests today. So this program is a program of the Environmental Protection Agency. And since its inception in 1994, the Environmental Justice Small Grants, and that's the EJSG acronym that we use, has awarded more than $37 million in funding to over 1,500 community-based organizations, tribal governments, and Native American organizations working with communities facing environmental justice issues. The Environmental Justice Small Grants Program supports and empowers communities working on solutions to local environmental and public health issues. The program is designed to help communities understand and address exposures to multiple environmental harms and risks. This is the program that we're introducing to you today.
So I'm gonna get right into EPA's mission and current priorities. So the mission of the EPA is to protect human health and the environment. And we are a regulatory agency under the executive branch of the United States federal government. We were established December 2nd, 1970, in response to a number of environmental disasters. The nation's realization that Earth's resources are finite, and President Richard Nixon's resulting 37-point message to Congress about the nation's need for environmental protection. In the last 50 years, EPA has made significant strides in the advancement of environmental protection in this country. And in fact, there are far too many advancements to enumerate and name in this particular discussion today. However, the one advancement that I will specifically speak to is the one that brings us together here today, and that is environmental justice. The federal government's current priority and urgency toward environmental justice has brought about an unprecedented call to action that warrants the needs for communities of color to take full advantage of the current manifestation of opportunities before them. Currently, the government is committed to an agenda to ensure that all communities and all people receive the protection from environmental hazards and harm that they deserve. The administration's whole of government approach and philosophy toward fighting environmental injustice is emphasized in President Biden's Executive Order 14008, which mandates the implementation of the Justice 40 initiative and federal investments that support how we will work together to advance environmental justice. Since day one from the executive order, our current EPA administration, led by Administrator Michael Regan, has been laser focused on fulfilling the president's commitment to advancing environmental justice and uplifting communities that have been disproportionately impacted by harmful pollution. As some of you may be aware, through the Journey to Justice tour, Administrator Regan had taken every opportunity to visit and engage communities around the nation who suffered from decades of environmental injustice. The conversations and observations that he and his team, made during that tour provided the administrator with the perspective needed to help him and his team to drive policymaking in Washington, D.C. And through the Biden administration's current investment strategy, known as the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, EPA was provided with an unprecedented infusion of funding in the total amount of $60 billion to upgrade water infrastructure, replace lead pipes, clean up toxic waste sites, and decarbonize the nation's school bus fleet. This massive amount of funding bolsters 73 of EPA's pre-existing environmental programs and creates funding opportunities for many of the boots on the ground organizations like BIG. So EPA's priority to ensure that all people in this country, regardless of the color of your skin, community they live in, or their socioeconomic status, have clean air to breathe, clean water to drink, and the opportunity to lead a healthy life. That is EPA's priority. So we're providing underserved communities with tools, resources, and technical support to advance EJ, environmental justice. And if there ever be a prime time for communities to take advantage of an open door to environmental justice, it's right now. So now is the time for communities to activate and animate the plans that they have to create solutions that they believe will work for their communities. So EPA is here to support the community. And if you need any proof of that, then Biggs Lead-Free Water for All is a perfect example of what happens when tools, resources, and technical assistance are provided to support the underserved communities. And I say again, communities that have developed solutions that work best for them. As we, you, Big, EPA, and other community partners continue to develop and advance lasting solutions to some of our most pressing environmental challenges, it is essential that Black, Brown, and other communities of color always not only have a seat at the table, but actually come to the table to use their voices. All of that said, I would like to share some general information about EPA's Region 5 Environmental Justice Program, the Justice 40 Initiative, and how the bipartisan infrastructure law has bolstered EPA's mission to protect public health and the environment. So next slide, please. So environmental justice at EPA, just the definition of EJ. It's the fair treatment and meaningful involvement of all people, regardless of race, color, national origin, income, and the like. And the goal is will be achieved when everyone enjoys the same degree of protection from environmental and health hazards, as well as equal access to the decision-making process to have a healthy environment in which to live, learn, and work. Next slide. Region 5, we cover Illinois, Indiana, Michigan, Minnesota, Ohio, and Wisconsin, as well as 35 tribes. Our EJ program works regularly with community organizations and has a strong relationship with co-regulators at the state and local levels. We utilize a collaborative approach to environmental justice, and our efforts, I won't read all of this, but our efforts includes enforcement programs, permitting programs, as well as community-based work. All of that is done by way of outreach, formal meetings, and the like. So next slide, please. In terms of the Executive Order 14008 and how it bolsters EPA's pre-existing programs, this is not a complete representation of the funding that is available under those particular programs, but I did include a QR code there on the bottom of the screen for those of you who would be interested in using it to actually go to the EPA's public-facing website that provides a complete listing of all of the current funding opportunities available. But these are, we have listed the EJ Small Grants Program. You see the acronym there, EJSG, which is what BIG currently is participating under. It's a $75,000 grant for a one-year program. One-year project. It's the starter grant. And the program is open for application biannually. And so there's actually another opportunity that's coming up pretty soon. So if you want to visit the website, you will find more information about the when and how to apply for that particular grant. The next grant, which is the EJ Collaborative Problem Solving Cooperative Agreement. That's a step up from the starter grant, that one-year project for $75,000. This is actually a cooperative agreement where EPA is actually an active participant and partner in the entire project. And that particular grant program is for 2-year projects with a cap of $200,000. The step up from that, which I believe Naomi and her team and other partners have actually heard about, is the EJ Thriving Communities Technical Assistance Center grant project. And that particular one is far above the starter grant, which is where BIG is right now. But it is a $10 million grant for a 5-year project that is available to organizations that meet those requirements. There are a plethora of requirements that are listed, and in order to find out more information about that particular grant, you will definitely be able to use the QR code that I provided to find out more information. And then there are a few other programs here. You see the state EJ Cooperative Agreement Program that's specifically for states, the Environmental Justice Communities Pass-Through Program, as well as the EJ Government to Government Program. Again, if you would like more information about those programs and other funding opportunities, please visit that QR code. And if you don't have access to that QR code, you just go to epa.gov and look for the environmental justice site, and it has a link to all of EPA's EJ funded grants. So next slide, please. Okay, I want to give you a little more information, in-depth information about the EJSG, the $75,000 grant. This is just some general information, and again, it's a starter grant. Its goal is to help affected communities create self-sustaining community-based partnerships to improve the environment. There's no substantial EPA involvement involved with this particular grant, and it's designed to assist grantees to develop and implement a plan to build, maintain, and sustain partnerships. There's some information there about the project purpose as well as project performance measures. But again, this is the starter grant, and it's just like an entry-level grant for community organizations and the like that are interested in carrying out the EPA's mission to protect public health and the environment. So next slide, please. There's also some more information there about the EJ Collaborative Problem Solving Cooperative Agreement Program. Again, I won't go through all of this information. You can find it at our public facing sites with the information about all of the available programs. But again, that one is for the $200,000 grant for a 2-year project. Next slide, please. And then this slide here goes over the EJ Tic-Tac that we talked about, which is for $10 million in 5 years. Again, I would encourage you to visit our public facing site to get more information about these particular programs. Next slide. Okay, so this is my final slide here. And I've provided another QR code for you to use to go to the EPA's Environmental Justice website to get more information about EPA's program for environmental justice. And it talks about all of the EJ funded programs, as well as tips, tools, resources, how to apply for grants and the like. If you do not have access to a device that you can use to access the QR code, you can actually, again, just go to epa.gov, search environmental justice, and it will take you straight to the site with all of that information. That's all I have.
Amen.
Okay.
One of the points that I hope you have gotten from Alicia's address is that we do have the resources available for you to do things that will really make a change in the lives of the people in the community. And the other thing is that it requires some follow through on our part. We just can't sit and listen to presentations and listen to programs and not take some action on our part. And today, we're asking you to take an action. We'll go into some brief detail later on as to what you can do, but just very briefly, we have a questionnaire here today for the people that are here in person that they can fill out if you're interested in getting a water purification system in your home. And we invite you to fill that questionnaire out, and we will follow up with you. If you're online, we are going to put that questionnaire or link to that questionnaire in the chat, and you can access it there. But we'd like for you to fill it out and let us know if you are interested in getting a water filtration system in your home. So as we indicated, we are trying to make available to you here today all of the resources that we have that can really assist you in making a change, particularly in the area of health and water quality here in Chicago area. Our next guest is going to be able to help us in that area, and that is Jeremy Orr. And Jeremy is the Director of Litigation and Advocacy Partnerships at Earth Justice. In this role, he helps Earth Justice's offices, programs, and departments build strategies to deeply engage and genuinely partner with communities and other stakeholders. Prior to joining Earth Justice, Jeremy served as a senior attorney with the Natural Resources Defense Council, where he focused on drinking water, and that's what we're talking about here today, and source water protection issues, working to ensure that all people have access to safe, sufficient, and affordable drinking water. Immediately before that, Jeremy worked for People's Climate Movement as the Director of State Programs, building and mobilizing coalitions across more than 20 states in the pursuit of climate justice. We'd like to welcome today to our event and for his comments, Jeremy Orr.
Thank you. Can everyone hear me okay? Okay, awesome. I'll get going then. So thank you all for having me, to join you all for this event. Water justice is something that's, near and dear to my heart. And I've had a chance not only to kind of work in the space over the years, as mentioned in the introduction, but also it's part of my own, kind of lived experience. I know what it's like to not have access to water. I grew up in a home where at various points, our water was shut off. I grew up in Detroit. That's where I'm from, and lived in a two-parent home where both parents worked, and yet there were times where we still couldn't afford our water bill, right? So I think as I began to engage in this work, it wasn't only kind of from a professional standpoint, but it was also from a standpoint of knowing what it actually feels like to not have water. So as mentioned, the last few years, I spent my time as a senior attorney at the Natural Resources Defense Council, out of the Chicago office, where I worked on a number of different issues around water, from contamination, access, affordability, and issues of that sort. And one of the main areas I focused on, particularly in Illinois and Chicago, was lead service line replacement and lead contamination in water. And that's what I'll share a bit about today, particularly around the local lead and drinking water in Chicago, statewide, and maybe a little bit of federal action on lead and drinking water. And in the midst of that work, not only did I work in kind of Chicago and Illinois, but kind of worked around the Midwest and around the country on a number of these, kind of different issues. Kind of got my start in water, in particular with the Flint water crisis. I was working at a law clinic in Detroit at the time when the water crisis started, and had an opportunity to work with a number of colleagues in the legal field, as well as colleagues at EPA who were on the ground responding, and support that work there. And that kind of put me on a trajectory to continue to work in water justice and water access as a career. And as noted, I work full time as a director of litigation and advocacy partnerships at Earth Justice now, where I work with our attorneys on strategies for movement lawyering and community lawyering to better represent communities, in particular frontline communities, EJ communities, and other impacted communities. So I'll start a bit with kind of the lay of the land in Chicago with lead service lines. One thing is that the city of Chicago has the most lead service lines of any city in the country. They're estimated to have about 400,000 lead service lines. When you look at other major cities around the country, the next closest ones generally tend to be less than 200,000. For comparison, Detroit has less than 100,000. Milwaukee, just think of places in the region, has probably less than 100,000, around 80,000. Even the city of New York, right, has less lead service lines than the city of Chicago. The reason for that is that the city of Chicago mandated the use of lead service lines up until 1986. 1986 is when the use of lead service lines was actually banned by the federal government. So up until that point, where many other communities and other cities around the country have stopped using lead because they knew the dangers of it. The dangers of it were well known. Many communities stopped using it, decades before, but yet the city of Chicago continued to use it all the way through 1986. So that, that explains why there are still so many lead service lines in the ground. In particular, you find them in older housing stock and older communities. But one of the things that began to come up as we talked about, the city of Chicago and the issues that they were facing around lead in drinking water and getting these lead service lines out of the ground, was where they were. And I think Jeremiah is going to talk a bit about, kind of community research and the aspects that go into collecting data and information and around water and other types of issues. But one of the things that took place was we had a number of organizations come together to begin to lift up how this issue is disproportionately impacting communities of color in and around Chicago. And the Metropolitan Planning Council produced research that showed in and around Chicago and even around the state, majority of lead service lines were in communities of color, more than double, right? More than twice as likely to be in communities of color. One of the other things was some of that data showed kind of regardless of income, right? Regardless of income. So even higher income communities of color and higher income individuals still were more likely to have multiple lead service lines in their community. And then one of the biggest pieces was that 90% of the lead service lines were predominantly in communities of color. And there could be a number of explanations for that, right? But one is when we look at the racial injustice of where lead service lines were placed, and in particular also where lead service lines were being remediated over the last 30 or 40 years. They were being remediated and taken out of wealthier white communities and being left in poor communities of color. So one of the things we began to do was work, begin to organize our communities around Chicago to work and push the city on this issue of creating a Chicago lead service line replacement program, which they launched, I believe, back in, I think the first one launched back in 2020, if I'm not mistaken, is when they announced it, to begin to replace the lead service lines in the city of Chicago. One of the programs is what they call an equity lead service line replacement program, which low-income residents can apply for and get their lead service line replaced for free. The other one is a homeowner program where you may not meet the lower threshold of income, but you still want to replace your lead service lines. And you can, you'll get, some sort of discounted rate to replace your lead service line. I think one of the issues that we've talked about in these kind of situations is, there should be no differentiation between, lead service lines, the public side and the private side, and who pays for what, especially in a city where it was required to have lead service lines. So in my work, I've worked to kind of push, right, and gear towards a replacement mechanism, a replacement method in which no resident, right, should have to pay to have their lead service lines replaced regardless of income, especially when you're looking at a city like Chicago where it was, required and nobody asked for this. So City of Chicago launched these two programs. They've been pretty slow to start, and I don't think it's for lack of resources. I think a big part of that has been just kind of the lack of ability to engage communities, in particular communities of color, predominantly in the South Side and Southeast sides as well. I think the city could be doing a much better job of engaging actual organizations like a Blacks and Green and like a El Vejo and other organizations that are in those communities that have members that are in touch with residents to help them better understand the issues and better connect with the city to get these issues fixed. So that's where we're at with the city of Chicago. The city of Chicago helped us kind of better get an understanding of the lead issue in context of the rest of the state. We realized that there was really no communities that were safe from lead in drinking water throughout the state of Illinois. And because of that, we began to push for a bill, the creation, the drafting and passage of a bill to replace all the lead service lines in the state of Illinois. And this was an initiative that had started some years ago and just hadn't been able to get the right group of people in the room, the right stakeholders, and get on the right page to pass this. One of the things we were able to do in this work was begin to organize our partners, right? All of our partners, even many of these partners in the room, right? Blacks and Green, Elevate, of course. I've seen Caroline in the room, who's done a great job working on the remediation of lead pipes and lead in schools and daycares. El Vejo, where you hear from Jeremiah, who formerly worked at El Vejo and worked on these issues with us. the Illinois Environmental Council, and of course, Metropolitan Planning Council, Faith in Place. There were just so many organizations that finally were able to come together a couple of years ago and say, okay, let's not only fix this issue in Chicago, but let's also fix this issue around the state. Because as noted, this research that had been done showed that 90% of the lead service lines were in communities of color around the state, right, and in particular around the northeast region of Illinois. So we kind of went all hands on deck to work with our legislators, right, in the state house and the state senate to draft a bill that was equitable, that would prioritize communities, that would do it in a way that was just, and also move this work in a timely manner, which we were able to get done. We worked on this bill in 2021 and was able to get it through the legislature, which was pretty landmark legislation. It's the first piece of legislation in the country to mandate the replacement of all lead service lines. As I mentioned, Chicago has more than 400,000 lead service lines, the most of any city in the country. Illinois has about 1 million lead service lines estimated, the most of any state in the country. And we estimate that there are roughly 10 million lead pipes around the country. So we're talking one state, Illinois, has roughly 10%, if not more, of all the lead pipes in the U.S. And we passed this landmark legislation that did a number of different things. It mandated the replacement of all lead service lines. It banned this practice of partial lead service line replacement, which actually increases lead in your water. It required an inventory of the lead service lines to begin starting in this coming year in 2023. It required a lead service line replacement plan. So it's not just a water system or community utility. You can't just say we're doing the work, but no, you're required to submit a plan to the state. It creates a fund, an allocation of money that when accessed then requires that community community water system or that public water system to fund the full replacement of lead service lines so that it doesn't fall on the resident. If you're going to access these funds, you can't then double dip and charge residents to replace their pipes or raise their fees or charge them individually. It also requires the replacement of lead service lines alongside any other infrastructure construction that you're doing, in particular water main replacement. If you're going to replace a water main, communities are now required to also replace your lead service line. And it created an advisory board, which I understand has been, has already begun meeting, and it has frontline communities and EJ community representatives on it. And it also establishes a statewide low-income water assistance program, which also was the first to be launched in the country. No state had a statewide water assistance program, low-income water assistance program. So we were able to do that there. And all of these were in pursuit of water justice, right? Realizing that who was directly impacted by it, who was disproportionately impacted. We know to be, of course, Black communities are at the top of that disproportionate impact, but also other communities as well. So other communities of color as well. So, and then I'll last thing I'll say is there's also a need for federal action on this. The EPA, under the Trump administration introduced a revamping of the lead and copper rule to help address this issue. That rule in and of itself just simply not only was it not sufficient, but it was really a rollback of protections that already existed. So it was a weaker rule, and a number of organizations in RDC and NAACP were able to sue to pause this rule and get back on track with the Biden administration coming in to revamp this federal rule that we're looking to be much stronger, much more protective, prioritize communities, and hopefully mandate the replacement of lead service lines. And now I see there's a message from Naomi, a question of, can you describe where the work is happening now? Where is it planned next? What's smart? What warrants improvement in this plan? So in particular, I can share about the city of Chicago's plan, because that's the one I think is really important and most relevant to this conversation of water justice, in our communities. And one of the unfortunate things I mentioned that the city of Chicago rolled out these two programs, this free program and this paid program. They rolled it out 2 years ago. And our understanding at last we checked, right, the city at a point earlier this year had only replaced, 8 8 lead service lines or something like that, right? And this is a city that has over 400,000 lead service lines. Um, we're supposed to be replacing, pipes at a rate of over 600 lead service lines per year, but yet, they struggle to really get this program going. And I think a big part of that has been, which I mentioned, was actually engaging communities who can help you, um, help you understand the best way to approach our communities to get this work done. And because one of the unfortunate things, as you could imagine, with many residents, is there's a real lack of trust in government, right? In particular, local government, that we've seen over the years, and is very warranted, right? Because of issues that our communities have faced. However, one of the things that communities can, one of the things that our city and utilities can do is work with people in the community who actually are trusted, right? There are trusted leaders and organizations in our communities who if they show up at your door, if they're the ones calling you, if they're the ones emailing you and saying, hey, the city is actually trying to do good work here, I can vouch for them, right? We can walk you through this. That's different than not engaging communities, not doing that legwork, and then wondering why you haven't been able to implement your program in a meaningful way. I think one of the so that's been the short of it. They've struggled to engage residents around it. The other part of this is there's what they call a block level program where they're looking to replace the pipes on one whole block. I believe I know it's southeast. I believe it's in Little Village, if I'm not mistaken, where that program is supposed to be taking place at. Again, they announced that program about a year ago, and I think there are about maybe 40 houses on that block. And over the last year, they've yet again only been able to get the permission to replace the pipes of probably less than half of those homes. Again, a big part of that being just the lack of engagement of residents and lack of engagement of community groups who can serve as a liaison between that. So that program, that's where it is now. I know the city has been continuing to try to ramp up. I know they've had a lot of resources. I think they're looking to ramp up hiring to do this work, and continue to move that work forward, which I think is promising. But it certainly needs to continue to center residents and prioritize residents in that engagement portion. I think another question here is, if renters suspect the water may be contaminated with lead, who should they contact and how do they have an individual test? So you are able to reach out to the city of Chicago to get your water tested, regardless of whether you're a renter or owner. So the city of Chicago has a program in which you can have your water tested. They have, I think the website is Lead Safe Chicago, I believe is leadsafechicago.org or probably .org if it's a government, but they have a Lead Safe Chicago page where there are these resources to not only get tested, but also, you can get a filter, right? You can go on this website and get a filter. I know one of the struggles has been, how do you access these filters or apply for a filter? And one of the things we've been pushing for is, if you think your water is contaminated, the city should make you apply. You shouldn't need proof to get a filter, right? While you wait to see if your water is contaminated or not. But there are these, resources where the city can test your water at your request as well. And that's regardless of whether you're a renter or owner. But to that point as well, right, it certainly doesn't hurt to let your landlord know. And in particular, if you are a renter and you do get tests back that it's contaminated, also, letting your landlord or the owner of that home know. And then one more question I see is, thanks for putting that website in there, Yvonne. And then one more question we have is, how can we best, organize to advocate for prioritizing changing lead service line to our daycares and elementaries? And if I can't see the crowd, but if Caroline's still in the room, like I would defer to her on that. I know one of the things that we've talked about is a number of the rules, kind of these lead and copper rules and bills that are passed. They separate the work of lead service lines on particularly residential homes from the governance is separate from that of schools and daycares. And I think one of the things is connecting with people like Caroline and connecting with organizations like Elevate, who are actually like really leading this work in a meaningful way, not only locally, but statewide and nationally as well. And one more question, I think, is are we seeing or concerned with how lead replacement is connected to gentrification? Yes, yeah, absolutely. And I think that goes back to this issue that we mentioned before of when you look at areas where lead service lines have been replaced historically, where they no longer exist, right? If you're telling me there were 500,000 lead service lines in the city of Chicago, the overwhelming majority of those are in the west side and the south side, but yet we knew they were mandated all throughout the community. That means that as communities continue to gentrify, the replacement of these lead service lines have been happening somewhere. They've been happening in wealthier, particularly gentrifying communities, and not in the long-standing historic, Black and brown and immigrant communities throughout the city and really places around the country. And I see Caroline's at the mic, so I'll defer to her on the prior question.
So Elevate, we're a nonprofit, and we do have funding available to help childcare facilities, whether you're home-based or in a center, with plumbing upgrades to address lead in drinking water. We also have free testing resources if you want to test your water for lead. And then the city of Chicago also recently opened up funding to help daycare facilities in the city of Chicago replace their lead service lines if they're connected to one. The one thing that I will say though is that we don't have nearly enough funding to help all childcare facilities or homes in the state of Illinois or in Chicago right now with lead service line replacement. So we really need to advocate to our government officials, policymakers, the need to open up more funding for this so that all childcare providers and homeowners and renters have access to having their lead service lines replaced.
And this is a good information to start with because we really have to be practical and tactical in what actions we're taking. Elevate is a longtime leader in this field and does amazing work from the standpoint of policy as well as on the ground intervention. So we appreciate and acknowledge their leadership. But Mila's pointing to another aspect of how we must work together on the ground. Because these are, facts are swimming around at a lot of different levels right now. Social media has run amok with news, fake news, and everything in between. But true, actionable, tangible, reachable tactics, people, tools, these are not yet at a critical mass where we're seeing results impact at scale in the Black and brown communities. So Mila says there's a list of licensed and bonded plumbers to do this work in Chicago. How many of those plumbers are Black or brown businesses? And Mila, you might want to say a little bit more about the list. Who's the keeper of the list or the source of the list? Do you want to, Amadilo, do you want to direct her which mic she should speak to, or should she just come up to the podium?
Come up to the podium.
Mila, my buddy Mila. And I want you to note, as you probably have already, that African Americans with deep specialization in this area, there's not a ton of them, but there is a growing mass of them. And this young lady here is at the top of that heap in our local intelligentsia, and we're so blessed to have her as part of our family. Okay.
Hi, everybody. My name is Mila Marshall. I am the Clean Water Advocate for the Sierra Club Illinois chapter. I work on statewide water issues, and a part of my curiosity is understanding how information flows from the local government to the actual people. And so we know that the private sector is really important in providing accurate information for products and services. And so the city of Chicago has the lead-free Chicago or lead service-free Chicago. It's a a government held website. It tells you about the programs that your property is eligible for. So another thing to note is that 80% of Americans get their water knowledge from public media. So newspapers and television. So things on the website might not necessarily connect with homeowners, and businesses are really important so that they can educate people. On that list, it'll just go alphabetical, but it doesn't tell you who is a minority business. It doesn't let you know who's a woman-owned business. And
That
so,
list is on that LetSaveChicago.org.
yes, I believe so. You know, thank you. I appreciate, wait, maybe is, you know what, let me.
LetSaveChicago.org.
But I see that as so, yes.
Mhm.
So for me, I'm interested and curious, how many of those practitioners are from our community? Because what we know is, as environmentalists, if we don't have people in the private sector that are out doing the conversations about here are the programs, this is the money, then it's the government directly to the public. And we already know that that communication pipeline is a bit inaccessible. We do have our aldermen. We have the environmental committee made up of alder people. I don't think a single one of them is from an environmental justice community, which is unfortunate. And so we do need to think about who's licensed and bonded, which brings us to another issue of how businesses can become licensed and bonded, because in our neighborhoods, we have people who are experts, but they don't have the capital to get the necessary documents to be eligible for the programs. And so that's another part to inaccessibility for the Black community, is that the businesses can't get the capital from banks so that they can be like legally operating entities. That creates a bit of a bottleneck for the businesses that can participate in the program, which creates another bottleneck for who can even talk about these programs. And so that's where the question kind of came from.
Thank you.
Yes.
Mhm.
Thank you so much, Mila, and those are very important questions. And thank you also, Jeremy. I want to thank you, first of all, for presenting here to us today, but thank you also for your long years of work in this very important space. And I said long years of work because looking at you on screen, I see that you're a very young person. And that is really inspiring to me, because the work that we're doing today is not going to yield results tomorrow. But if we want results for the next generation, for the next decade, we have to start today. So I thank you very much for your work. The next person we want to introduce, and also will make this point too, and that is that Jeremy's analysis of the city's program makes a very important point that we should not lose here. And that is the city and nobody else is going to come here to save us. All right. You see where their program is, and how many years, decades, or centuries is it going to take for them to really get to your particular water line? So that's why I'm really, really pleased about the EPA's support here, the support of Elevate the EPA, support of UIC, Jeremy, your work, and Jeremiah's work, who we want to introduce shortly. And that is that we have to advance strategies of self-help, strategies that will enable us to solve our own problems with the help of organizations that are assisting us. And if we don't do it ourselves, it's not going to get done in our lifetime.
I want to make another point about city and process, and it's a phenomenon that many of us are very familiar, all too familiar with, which is the right hand and the left hand syndrome in capital work here in the city. We have a profound publicly funded gas line replacement program, the Qualified Investment Infrastructure Plan of People's Gas, for example, which is a $11 billion replacement program, which many of us have stepped up to speak against the continuance of. But we have right now movement to replace aging in gas infrastructure in the city. We have water work happening. We have broadband infrastructure happening. Our streets are opened and closed and opened and closed and opened and closed without adequate coordination between the infrastructure projects. And we have got to step up and require reporting. We need to be a part of the coordination process. We need to insist on higher levels of industrial hygiene. We have our trees being diminished. We have, equipment being left willy-nilly, all kinds of construction debris lingering far too long. In other words, this is an opportunity for us to step up and improve a citywide group of services. And I think the challenge with the lead service line replacement that we've heard described right now is a perfect opportunity for us to organize and get more involved in improving the city service economies of scale and delivery protocol.
That's an excellent point, and it's a perfect segue to our next guest, Jeremiah Muhammad, because Jeremiah is the manager of water leadership and engagement at EPIC, which is the Environmental Policy Innovation Council. And he will explore how local leaders and community-based organizations such as BIG can build trusting relationships between communities and utilities. And I will add to utilities and public bodies, and how EPIC can build programs that lift local leadership. Jeremiah is manager of the water leadership and engagement, works to expand the role that EPIC can play in supporting local leaders. In his role, he explores how we can build programs and lift that leadership, the capacity building and the skills development through our lead-free water and funding navigator community engagements. In addition to our network of advocates in the policy forum, Jeremiah has a background in environmental justice movements. First in the Center for Science and Democracy, CSD, with the Union of Concerned Scientists, and then Environmental Justice Health Alliance. And most recently with Little Village Environmental Justice Organization, LVEO, where he served as the program manager for their water justice program. Jeremiah?
Thank you for that introduction. And thank you, Naomi, for inviting me. I thought you forgot about me a little bit after I left LaVale. But I spent 5 years I wasn't always the program manager of the water justice program at LaVale. We didn't have a water program. We didn't have the infrastructure or the capacity for one. We wanted to engage in this work, but as a small environmental justice organization, at the time, we just didn't have, the capacity. It was mainly, at that point, it was mainly me and Juliana Pino, who was leading every scope of our policy work, and was one of the big actors in helping get the state water policy and legislation passed. But, it wasn't it was because of the help with people like Elevate and Jeremy Orr when he was at NRDC, where we, in 2020 got some funding and also was able to, do what we could do what we do best at LaVale, and that was community organizing and advocacy. And one thing that I want to highlight today that we really don't talk about in this water space, and since I've transitioned over to EPIC, it's not talked about at all, is the fact that we don't treat community members as the experts. We don't treat people who deal with these issues, whether it's PFAS or lead or, urban flooding, other environmental issues as the experts. We usually see those experts at these think tanks or in government or academia, but the people that we've, realized that understand these issues the best are the people from those communities. And what we did at Lavejo with the help of Elevate in 2020 is that we, did a lot of water distribution. And I think partner were big on that as well. But a lot of that was not just spent, giving out water, it was more so talking about the issues, talking about what have you experienced in your home, what have you experienced in your community, and then also having that communication exchange and information exchange where we talk about, lead service line replacement. Have you had your home tested for lead? Do you know what impacts lead can have on you and your family? And so that when coupled with our, organizing approach, our great organizers on the team, I shout them out, Nancy and Edith over at Lavejo, we had a research component to that. And typically when you're a small EJ organization, we really don't have, the space to do a lot of this work in-house, and we have to get that support from other partners and external partners. And while we did have that, especially with NRDC, we were able to build that infrastructure in-house, and also with partners like the Center for Neighborhood Technology to work on not just drinking water work, but flooding work as well. And, the big part of the work was, education and advocacy, and when you look at a community like Little Village, one of the main issues when it comes to replacing your water, when it comes to talking about replacing, lead service lines or even getting your water tested, there's an added component that's not really talked about in every community. And Little Village, South Lawndale is a largely immigrant community. A lot of those residents are undocumented. And so a lot of those residents have a fear of even requesting, to have their water tested or, speaking out on certain injustices in the community, especially from a water standpoint and other standpoints as well. And because of fear that of government being reprimanded by the government, and deportation, things like that. So the work of advocacy and an organization like Little Village Environmental Justice Organization is to be that liaison for the community and that advocate for the community, but also be that bridge builder for, between the community and the government. And so we've been doing that work for a while, since I've been there, it was 5 years, that's how we started our water program. It's more so just education, community meetings, door knocking, but also updating the community on how the process is going. One of the frustrations that we have in this space, but also, residents have, is the fact that why does change take so long? And one thing that when we have organizations like the organization I'm currently at, they may come into a community, they say, hey, this is what's going on, then they never come into that community again. It's the fact that it leaves community members and residents upset and confused. And so even when something's not, policy isn't moving as fast as it is, we are constantly in communication with those residents and that people in that neighborhood or any neighborhood, those communities. But we also work hand in hand and pushing back on things. When we look at Jim mentioned the pilot program that's going on for replacing the lead service lines in a block in Little Village, it's not going fast enough. You've had community members having to jump through hoops and things and be blocked and all of that stuff to try to find out what is the updates, what is going on, what's going to happen with the lead service line replacement, who's going to be on the hook for this, and the city hasn't been as forthcoming or transparent with that. And so it's our responsibility to, be an advocate and speak out on those things, and so in my 5 years at Lavejo, we started out, wanting to build this water program through, the issues that were happening in the CPS, Chicago Public Schools. And then it just ballooned into something else. And we started working on not just drinking water issues, but flooding as well. You know, Little Village, sorry, has a history of, you know, intense urban flooding. And when you're next to an industrial corridor and things like that, you have this cumulative impact and a possible exposure to other chemicals. And so we've worked with community members and, you know, CNT to actually collect data on information regarding, you know, flooding and possible exposure to certain things. And then couple that with, you know, water access, you know, and we found significant findings to that. But that work would not be, we wouldn't be able to do that work if it wasn't for community. You know, one of my mentors at my previous place of employment, Michelle Roberts, when I was with the Environmental Justice Health Alliance, always mentioned that we have to take community members serious. And we can't just come in from our ivory towers, whether, you know, we're in the academia or the government, and tell community that we know better than them. And instead, we have to show up for those groups and show up for those residents and actually, you know, take the time to listen to them, take the time to treat them like the experts that they are. Just because they don't have a master's in public health or a PhD or whatever doesn't mean the knowledge that they have is invaluable. And in the reports that LaVale has published, you see that, you know, from our land use work, well, from their land use work and to the work that they've done on water, it's all highlighted, it's all the community's front and center in that because they led a lot of that work. Now, when I transitioned over into EPIC, it was more so because I wanted to reach other communities that were similar to where I came from. And EPIC provided me with the ability and flexibility to do that. And a lot of that work that I do at EPIC was, you know, inspired by the partners that I had at NRDC and Elevate, and how I noticed how intentional they were with community organizations. And they didn't have this approach to where you show up one time, you parachute into a community, tell them what they need, and then you leave. It was a more long and intentional process. You know, the water program at LaVale wouldn't be what it is now without, you know, support from Jeremy Orr. You know, 3 years, I believe, when he invested in that work through NRDC and other funders. And so I took that mentality over into EPIC, which isn't an environmental justice organization or they don't have any roots in EJ, but we have a lot of, you know, technical assistance, support, and capacity. We have a lot of issue-based expertise. And what I plan to do and what I've set out to do in that space is to use those resources to actually benefit, you know, communities like, you know, communities and community organizations like where I come from in East St. Louis. Sorry, that's my son. East St. Louis or South Shore in Chicago that aren't really represented in this space. And a lot of that starts at, you know, being transparent about what you can do and what you want to do. But yeah, that's pretty much like this broad scope. That was pretty fast. I know you all want me to do 25 minutes, but I can sit down for any questions or anything.
My question was to you and Jeremy, and it was, what gives you hope in terms of lead service line replacement moving forward and tackling that and drinking water?
You said what gives me hope?
Yes.
Honestly, what gives me hope is the work that, you know, Big and LaVale and even Elevate are doing. This is a weird thing, but to say, or how to frame it, but when you have someone like a Brenda Santoyo at LaVale or Juliana Pino, or even like an Angela Guidine at NRDC, they're not going to let this issue go away until it's resolved. You know, they are dead set on holding the city accountable for these things. And when you have advocates like that, supporting organizations, those EJ organizations, which are supporting those communities that are dealing with these issues, then that's what gives me hope. This space needs more people. Well, the space has a lot of people like that. It's about who has those voices. And they're using those voices to actually highlight this issue and call out the people who are the worst actors or who aren't doing enough. But at the same time, they are also making headways in the policy space where pushing for legislation. We wouldn't have had that big, bill passed this last year if it wasn't for the movement like Jeremy Orr and Juliana Pino and things like that. So that's what gives me the hope, because you have this combination of the advocates, the research, and the policy people who are always front and center, who won't let this issue go away quietly without being resolved.
Yeah, I'll just, I'll say what gives me hope is a couple of things. One, like we're seeing attention and investment from our federal government on these issues in a way that we've never seen before, right? We're literally seeing historic investments in we're seeing historic investments in water infrastructure, in particular lead service line replacement with ARPA funds, with the bipartisan infrastructure and Inflation Reduction Act. So we've seen, that being prioritized, and we're seeing it being prioritized and talked about in a way that it hasn't been before. The other thing is we've actually seen the problem fixed in some of these areas, right? So I think my concern is that we've waited so long until crises happen to fix the issues. But I mean, we've seen other major cities, fix the problem, right? We've seen Flint replace the lead pipes, right, when they got the funding to do it. We've seen Benton Harbor, which was a city about an hour or so from Chicago in Michigan, predominantly Black low-income city, had a crisis last year that myself and another attorney was able to intervene and file a petition with EPA. Less than a year ago, they just announced last week they replaced 100% of the lead pipes in Benton Harbor, right? We've seen the 100% of the pipes replaced in Newark and in Pittsburgh and so on. So what gives me hope is we can do it, right? Like it's a problem that's solvable and fixable, and has been fixed in so many other cities around the country. So it gives me hope that not only are the resources being put there, but also that we're seeing them fixed in ways that it can be fixed here.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Caroline Packenham, and I'm the Associate Director of Water Programs at Elevate. And I just want to start by saying how excited Elevate is to be partnering with BIG and UIC on this project. It means so much to us, and I know it's going to have a huge impact on the community and really help address so many of the challenges that we've been talking about today. And when we talk about hope, this project gives me hope, and I know it's going to have a big difference in getting lead service line replacement really advanced and accelerated here in the city of Chicago. I didn't want to really give a presentation today, but more just introduce you to Elevate and what we work on in the water sphere. So Elevate is a nonprofit organization. We're headquartered here in Chicago. And what Elevate does is we design and implement programs that protect people and the environment. And we have a water program at Elevate, and that program is really centered on helping make sure that everyone has access to safe, clean, and affordable drinking water. And so on that front, we run a statewide lead and water testing program for childcare providers in the state of Illinois. So please look up elevatenp.org if you know of any childcare providers that need their water tested for lead. And then we also have a plumbing upgrade program where we will actually go out with a plumber, conduct an assessment at a childcare facility, and then provide plumbing upgrades for free to help childcare providers who have lead in their drinking water. We've worked with providers who are finding lead in their water greater than 2,000 parts per billion. So this is a real challenge. They need the assistance, and we're here to help them with that. And then the other program that I want to call to your attention is for residents in Chicago who are living without access to water. We work with partners like BIG to help get people reconnected to water access in their home. So we do have funding to provide emergency water access and reconnect people to water access in their homes. So we really hope that if you know someone who needs any of these services or support, you'll get them in contact with us because we would really love to help. And again, we're just very honored to be part of this project and here today. So thank you.
Sheila had a question or a comment.
Childcare providers that, how do I say this? Are there any requirements or risks for a business owner who has children that have been exposed or potentially exposed to lead? So are these business owners at risk of losing any other funding if they're not in compliance? Are they supposed to communicate with any other programs or entities that they're receiving funding from? Because one of the major concerns as we identify this infrastructure in these businesses, what then is the communication or what resources to protect them, as well as empower them to be transparent with families who are in those buildings as well?
That's an excellent question. So Mila was asking, childcare providers in the state of Illinois, what risks do they have if they do find lead in their facility? What reporting requirements do they have? Are there any consequences if they do find this? And one challenge that has been really hard for childcare providers in the state of Illinois, they are required to test their water for lead. If they find lead in their drinking water, they are required to mitigate and get lead down below 2.01 parts per billion. And when those lead testing rules came out, there was zero funding or support to help childcare providers pay for the cost of testing, understand how to test their water, and know what to do if they find lead in their drinking water. And so with some of the EPA funding that has been coming out, we've been able to get funding to test for free. And then we've been able to get funding to mitigate in Chicago, but there's no statewide system of support in place for all childcare providers. So it's ultimately an equity issue for childcare providers outside the city of Chicago. We also don't have enough funding to help all childcare providers in the city of Chicago if they do find lead in their drinking water. So when these childcare providers find lead in their water, they're having to rely on short-term solutions to address lead in drinking water. And sometimes, they don't have the guidance and support that they need. They're not lead experts. They have so much on their plates. They don't have all the time in the world. They're taking care of children, and they really need a lot of technical assistance and financial support to take care of this in the long term, which is really why it gets down to lead service line replacement and tackling some of the internal sources of lead in their facilities as well. They are also required to communicate the results to parents and staff, and there's a lot of support that needs to happen there as well, because they're very fearful a lot of losing families in their care if we do find lead in their drinking water. So there's a lot we need to do as a community to really support each other as we tackle this issue.
And thank you for that. I feel like that's a part of the conversation that almost is overlooked because we're so focused on identifying where those, where this issue is, but the businesses that are associated with them provide services.
Yep.
And if those businesses have to close down because we're trying to protect public health, these are these intersecting equity issues that we do have to kind of tease apart. And I can definitely see someone choosing to I can see the apprehension in Black and brown entrepreneurs for these types of programs, because there hasn't been any thoughtfulness of, if there is an identification, then how am I protected? Are the timelines greater? So thank you for that.
Thank you for the question.
Thank you, Karen.
Absolutely.
I think we've had a very full program presentation today. But unless we take something from this as a call to action or an action plan, then we just had a social gathering and it will have no effect. So what I'm suggesting to you today, that we are going to be moving forward, nice and green here, in organizing and activating our Black Chicago Water Council. And many of the solutions that were presented here today require concerted action. We've got many organizations that are working in many different spaces that we've identified today and working on this common problem. And we've identified the fact that the government, with all their funding and all their resources, are unable to do this by themselves. So what we are representing here today is that with the support of the EPA and Alicia, who is still here with us, they give us the opportunity to at least implement an immediate fix. And that is installing 16 water filtration systems in the area of Woodlawn and Chatham. So one of the things I'm going to be asking everybody here today that is here present and that is here remotely, and we are expecting to disseminate this presentation further to the Blacks and Green Network and to our ongoing work as a member of the Black Chicago Water Council. We're going to disseminate this information. What we're going to be asking them to do and asking you to do is identify a resident in Woodlawn that is going to be willing to remediate the land water issue in their own home by letting us install one of these water filtration systems. We are passing out for the residents here this questionnaire, which you can fill out, and we will follow up and have your water tested in your home and evaluate your water and implement a program to get your filtration system. Those of you who are remote, I'm hoping that Elza can, or Yvonne can include in the chat a link to this questionnaire. And we're asking you to fill out the questionnaire and send it back to us. We're also asking you, if you do receive this communication later, and for those of you who are present here today and those of you who are remote, we're going to be reaching out to you to participate in the Black Chicago Water Council and the issues that have been brought forward today that we can work together on, and the organizations that are involved in this work. We're asking you to reach out, to communicate with us, to collaborate with us in this Water Council to resolve some of these issues. I thank you very, very much for your attendance today, for your attention. I know it's been a long program, and I know we've worked through some technical difficulties, but here we are at the end of it, and I hope to be here ready to move. Thank you so much.